I've been connected to Pastor Wells. I met brother Dr. Wells in 2003 when I graduated from Sac State. That's when my mom and pops was going to church, and we've been brothers since then.
And I want you later on to talk about something you said about um, pushing your intellectual side, your intellect aside in the Black community. I want you to talk about that a little bit because I think that comes into play in our conversation on race and mental health. So nevertheless, we're grateful to have Dr. Henderson. This is an open conversation. If you want to share this with friends that you're connected to, those of you who are watching today, it's an open conversation. Everyone is welcome. And so feel free to do that. I do ask that you keep your mics muted, just in case there's some background interference. If you have a question or you want to add to the conversation, just cut your mic off, your mute off. I will see it. You can also raise your hand. There is a place on your menu where you can raise your hand and say, I'd like to ask a question or whatever. But we're really just going to have some dialogue. And so I do see, we do have a young person, Deshaun Brown. Welcome, Deshaun. I'm glad that you're here. And you're more than welcome, of course, anytime. And we are recording this. We are recording it, just started recording. I'll be posting it on YouTube and on Facebook. So you will have a chance to share this with those who are not with us this morning. So let me just, if you don't mind, if I can just open up with a word of prayer. I really want God's presence and power to be a part of our dialogue and our conversation. And so if you just give me a chance. Father, thank you for this morning, and thank you for the privilege and the opportunity to share and be a part of this conversation. Thank you for Dr. Henderson and the wisdom and the insight that he brings to this conversation. Bless our time together now. In Christ's name we pray, amen. All right, Dr. Henderson, so our conversation this morning, the topic of what we hope to gain some insight on from your perspective as a Black man, as an academician, as a professor, beginning your first professorship at Fresno State University. My condolences to you. But tell us your perspective of how mental health, mental illness comes into play in the conversation of racism. And particularly, of course, I want you to deal with the 21st century. I want you to deal with 2020. But if you can give us a summary of, what potentially has occurred in the life of African Americans since 1619, 1611, maybe earlier than that, coming across the Atlantic into the Americas, the journey through slavery, and everything that kind of followed. Can you kind of give us a brief synopsis? I know that's 400 years, right? So a synopsis is going to be a challenge. But if you can just kind of talk to us a little bit about the mental construct, the mental damage that potentially has occurred. Can you do that?
All right. Just before I get going, Pastor Wells, just to recap the question, you want me just to give a synopsis of how racism has impacted the mental health of Black folks over the course of 400 years?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. So when we think about racism and when we think about what it is and how it impacts behavior, I want us to take a quick look at its. So when we think about race, early on when we think about race, we kind of look at it as a way to kind of categorize different humans. And I didn't say this personally before. If there's ever any questions, take them down, or I feel free to address. This is what we like to call a barbershop talk. So if there's ever any questions or you want me to clarify something, let me know, and I will go into depth, whatever that question may be. So when we think about race was simply a way to kind of classify humans, right? And so that was race. But when we get into racism, right, racism is inherently built into all the sciences. So I'm gonna come forward to 2020. So when we're thinking about what's going on in the community, when we think about just the science, right? So as a clinician, as a counselor, I've been trained to understand mental health and kind of work with persons with disabilities. Now, when we take it a couple years back, let's say the United States of America Tuskegee experiment, right? Those experiments were on Black men who were serving in the military. And you say, well, what's the big deal about it? These men were being infected with syphilis and they were left to die, right? So the government was conducting an experiment just to kind of watch these brothers just kind of wither away and die. And you say, well, how does that relate to racism? Well, it relates to racism in this aspect. And I'm not even going back to actual slave times, is that produces a narrative, right? So my father would say, hey, Raymar, I'm tough. I'm not going to the doctor. And I say, well, Pop, why don't you go to the doctor? He said, well, I ain't gonna do nothing anyway. That's actually founded in the narrative that, okay, Black men, if you go to the doctor, you may not come out. You may not live to see your kids grow up, right? When we say, well, what does that mean about racism? Because when you look at brown skin, right, since the beginning of time, there's been a value attached to the color of one's skin, right? And so when we don't understand that value, right, when we attribute darker skin to be lesser value, we're then perceived to be subhuman. And that is some of the beginnings of racism, right? Because there's always attached value attached to the color of skin. So Tuskegee was one example. Another example could be, let's just say, redlining, right? And how does this produce mental health? So when we talk about redlining, and it may seem like I'm jumping all over the place, but I'm giving an example in the more like in the biological sciences, and now I'm giving another example in more of the financial component, being able to build wealth. So when we think about redlining and we say, well, hey, look at some of my white brothers and sisters, they say, well, hey, why don't you just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just produce it and get out there and make it happen? Well, when my father, who was a Marine, was relegated to certain types of loans, right? And his white colleagues were relegated to the loans that are more open, then we started to see an inequity about who can go to college, how is that college paid for, and it just produces these cycles. And those are just things I would say from 1920 to 2020, right? So when we get into actual slavery and being in bondage, right, and not being able to communicate those traumas, those atrocities. So just imagine, I'm gonna get a little in the weeds here. So imagine, so when you look at some of the slave capitals in Ghana,
Yeah, you guys can hear.
the slave masters had a staircase directly into the women's quarters, right? So imagine those slave masters going down there. They're not going down there to have tea and have a conversation. They're going down to where those women are to rape them, right? To sexually assault them, right? And imagine as a Black male, imagine the strife that happens between that Black family. When as a father, as a husband, you see your mother, your wife, your daughter being raped by a slave master, and what that communicates to the Black family. And a lot of folks will say, well, the Black family is not a stable unit. Well, there's history that comes into that. There's stress that comes into that. There's anxiety. So those are just some things, just, three main things that kind of contribute to, examples of racism, right? On a scale of very, very heavy to something kind of light, and how those effects continue to manifest generations. Because there's generationally, there's things going on with racism that the system is designed for us never really to address, right? So when I'm having that rub with my wife, or when I'm having that rub with communicating with another brother, being emotionally available, carrying around this anxiety, you say, well, why don't you just take these meds and get better? Or why don't you go to this therapist and just talk it out? And Black folks, I don't know if the folks know this on the call, is like, we have to have a relationship before we trust you and share some of those secrets. So those are just a couple things. Pastor Wells.
Yeah, I appreciate.
Anywhere you like to go into depth in?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I guess I'm looking at a lot of conversations being had right now about black on black crime. There's a lot of gaslighting that is taking place. We talk about Black Lives Matter, even from black people, but also from people of other races, talking about blacks being impoverished and gangs and all of those things. And I'm sure, as a black man, as an educator, as former law enforcement, I'm sure that there's a linkage between our history and how we find out. Obviously, we've got systemic racism as relates to redlining and all of that. How we found ourselves in one community, how we were relegated to a certain kind of career or employment, and which also affected our ability to gain wealth, to build wealth, and to make a living, to take care of a family, all of those things. I'm curious from your perspective as a clinician, what you know, and this may be outside the scope of your focus, but can you talk a little bit about currently how the black community, black on black crime, how that's linked to mental health?
Absolutely. So there's a topic in the literature that's called racialized stress, right? So you have regular stress, right? So just to give a brief history of stress. So when we get stressed, we have a biophysical, kind of like a cognitive, right, which is a fancy word to say thoughts. You have a physical response and you have a behavioral response, right? So, for example, paying bills without any money in the bank, right? You have a cognitive response, so you're thinking like, man, how am I gonna pay these bills when I don't have any money in the bank, right? You may have a physical response, so your palms may get sweaty, and you may have a behavioral response, right? If you're married, you may go in a room and just sit in the dark, right? So that's just to paying bills with not having any money in the bank. So when I talk about racialized stress, I want us to kind of like take a step back and kind of think about a couple things. So imagine your son or daughter, right, going out in Temecula or wherever you are to the mall. So you know what, we're gonna go grab some Cold Stone because it's hot outside, right? And they go get some Cold Stones. They're sitting outside because we're social distancing right now, and the police drives by 5 times, right? Which is definitely in the realm of a possibility, right? And there's a group of white students there, right, or white adolescents, and they actually get out and they shake their hand and kind of have conversation. But with those black kids, right, they're looking at them like, you, whatever, you don't belong here, right? And that's just one experience. So imagine having a multitude of experiences like that. If it's not at Cold Stones, it's like, hey, you know what? I want to get the new Jordans that's coming out right now, so I'm gonna go to the mall, right? And you experience some racism there. Or let's just say the classic example: you're driving on the road and a police car gets behind you. Well, some of my white brothers and sisters will say, hey, you know what? Well, I get nervous when the police get behind me. When you add the element of race and we understand the relationship between the police and the black community, those things are magnified, right? So I said before that when you're stressed, you have physical response, you have a psychological response, and you also have a behavioral response. So being a black person, what's one thing that black folks can't do? Well, some black folks have tried. You can't change the color of your skin. You can't change how you present phenotypically, right? And so with that being said, there's always an element of stress, right? And that can shorten your life. It can impact your relationships, ultimately resulting in death, right? And so really kind of understanding some of those undertones, like, oh man, here we go again. Oh, the police is behind me, so let me just firm up, right? Or you're walking in to get a loan to buy a home, right? You have the same qualifications as maybe one of your white brothers and sisters. Or you want to go to Nordstrom's, Nordstrom has a nice Ralph Lauren on sale, but you're like, you know what? I may just order online and spend a little bit more money because every time I go into Nordstrom's, they treat me like I don't have any money. So all these things can contribute to mental health, right? And so as Pastor Wells indicated, how does this connect to some of the social uprisings? So there's a subtle tweak in language, right? I don't call them riots, I call them social uprisings. And the reason why is because when you think about Black folks historically, right, we've always tried to kind of appeal to the morality of whites, right? Say, hey, you know what? I'm human just like you. You know, I just want a fair shot. And, you know, why can't I get a fair shot? Oh, we're going to burn across the front of your yard. You know, and then we come back again with, hey, you know what? You know, I'm human too. I just want a fair shot. Oh, well, you're not going to get approved for this loan. You know, you come back and say, hey, you know what? I have money too. I have a good job. I want to shop at Nordstrom's. I want to get the nice threads. Oh, you know what? We're going to treat you like you don't have any money and then maybe call the mall security. And then next thing you know, Black folks are, hey, man, I want to burn this joker down, right? And then you have white folks like, well, why are they acting like this, right? And so being not understanding, you know, the history that kind of goes into that, right? And mental health is written all over that thing. And what I usually ask folks, I say, hey, you know, well, who likes to exercise? Everybody raise their hand. Oh, I like to exercise, especially in January. I got my New Year's resolution. I want to get in shape. And then what I always ask people, I say, you know what? If you like to exercise, imagine doing that. Was it Peloton or going to 24-hour fitness with a 20-pound weight vest on, right? That first hour, you may still be holding it tight. After hour 8, you're like, oh my goodness, my shoulders are rolled over. So imagine carrying that vest on for your whole life, right? Which begins to impact your mental health, your physical health, so forth and so on.
So I think there's an ignorance both of people of color as well as those who observe the Black race, observe the Black condition. There's an ignorance around this issue of mental health. What can we do? What's our answer? How do we help? How do we help our people? One, how do we help our young people? I've got a couple of young people on the line. How do we help our young people deal with this issue, become more aware of the mental stress, the racial stress, the strain of mental struggle? How do we help both people of color and those who are not?
Well, I know this is the question of the hour, right? And I actually find that it's not as difficult as people make it out to be, right? So we got a young person on the call here. And so if Deshaun comes to me, right, and says, hey, I was in Macy's, you know, I was in Nordstrom's, and I was followed around and it made me feel like a piece of, you know what? I say, well, instead of, because even brothers and sisters, Black parents can even say, well, hey, are you sure that's what you really felt, right? Or if I go to one of my white brothers and sisters and say, hey, you know what? Every time I drive and the police get behind me, you know, I don't know, for some reason, my heart starts racing, palms get really sweaty. I have to pull over to get myself together. Instead of a white brother and sister saying, well, come on, are you really? You just validate, right? You give truth to that story, right? So imagine the times that we've shared something and the person who was receiving that message didn't give truth to what was being said. Like true truth, right? Imagine that.
What might that look like? What might that look like? If I'm a Black person or a white person and someone comes and says, hey, this happened to me, I don't have to believe it, I don't have to agree with it, but how do I give truth to that? As a parent or just as a leader?
So first thing is, a lot of these things should be happening internally, right? So giving yourself flexibility, right? Because a lot of so for example, if let's just say if Pete comes to me, right, and says, or if I'm talking to Pete, right, I say, hey, Pete, you know what, man, I really have the entrepreneurial spirit. And, I walked into Chase and they was looking at me like, hey, how come you don't have a suit on and a bow tie? And Pete says, you know what? Pete gives me, first of all, Pete takes the time to receive what I said. So first thing first is one, give it some time. Because oftentimes, we're already thinking about our response when somebody gives us a message, right? So first thing first is taking some time to receive it, right? The second thing is an element of vulnerability, right? Because there's a vulnerability to say, you know what, man, that's messed up, right? So one, Pete recognizes my humanity, right? And he's also being vulnerable by saying that's messed up, right? Because we're so quick to write off the narratives of other individuals, right? So those two things there are the thing. And what does that cause, Pastor Wells? That causes some interpersonal connectivity, right? That causes us to be able to come together, right? And begin to share stories, right? Create understanding, create awareness, right? The main thing is making sure not necessarily we want to get to a hard and fast solution. Sometimes folks want to be heard. And that's the thing that's most vital. I was saying, got a little feedback going on. Okay. So, and that's the thing that's most vital, right? Imagine just in your life how things could have went differently, whether it's with a significant other, at work, with friends, if the person whom you were communicating with felt heard, right? That's the main thing first. We don't feel heard, right? And also too, when we get further on down the street, when we're talking about, okay, how do we deal with mental health, and how do we deal with systemic oppression and institutionalized racism, we begin to, connect to other stories, right? So if Pete is not connected to my story, is Pete more or less likely to be an advocate? He's less likely to be an advocate because he's not connected to my story, right? He doesn't see the truth in it. Like, man, he's full of hot water. I mean, Raymar, why don't you go jump in a cold lake? That can't possibly be true, right? And so being able to kind of think about those things, right? If I'm connected to Patrice's story, right, I'm able to, okay, you know what? When she shared that, I feel some type of way. How can I support you? How can I stand shoulder to shoulder with you to create some change?
Okay.
Doctor, let me give you a quick example. You were not only using me as an example, but I proved to be an example of what you just described at a Zoom meeting this last week, where a Black woman was sharing her experience, and I can have it. I don't want to necessarily say where my response came from, because I think I really need to take a closer look at where my response came from. But essentially, I interrupted her. I stopped her story, and was not you used sarcasm, but not. Here's my justification, right? My sarcasm wasn't related to her story. It was related to a portion, just a small slice of her story, and I was trying to be funny. You know what? We were in an environment where we were talking about racism. It was our first meeting. There was no level of trust. I just met her. I interrupted her, which is rude, just to begin with, interrupting anybody. And I bet she felt, and these are your words, I bet she felt like I was not connected to her story. I can tell, I know she did. I know she felt that way because I saw the look on her face. Sometimes folks just want to be heard. So thank you. And you hit home, man. Home run on that one, and keep them coming.
Yeah. I think that's been one of the most difficult parts of this most recent conversation is that there has been a great deal of gaslighting. There has been a great deal of dismissal, obviously in the media and so forth, that these things are not real, that systemic racism is not real. I mean, we can add to the story that mental illness amongst Black people as a result of how we came into this country is not real. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to open this up for discussion. We've got two or three young people on the conversation. Ayana and Jeremiah, their parents are friends of mine. The Gibsons are always glad to have you guys with us. Ayana, Jeremiah, you guys can ask questions, but also Deborah and Tiffany, you guys as parents, of course, you can ask questions as well. But we're going to open it up for you to ask questions of Dr. Henderson. Patrice, who's also a dear friend, working on her therapist license. Is that correct, Patrice? Yeah. So we're going to be doing some things together. So we're glad to have you on the call. She's all the way in Bahrain, United Emirates. Is that right? Am I saying that correctly?
In Bahrain, not too far from the United Emirates, but in Bahrain, not too far from the Saudi border. Yeah, so all in that same area.
All in that, yeah, that Fertile Crescent. So let me open it up for questions. Dr. Henderson, Pete Cohen is a brother of mine, and I use that term specifically because he's like a brother. We've known each other for 30 years now, and he and I have reconnected and rebonded along this conversation. So we worked in law enforcement together, and so that's the connection that he and I have. But this conversation is open for parents, open for adults, open for kids to ask questions of Dr. Henderson.
And I would encourage everybody I can give you the Disneyland, or we can get right into the real, as we say.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're not interested in Disneyland. We've been to Disneyland. We've lived Disneyland for a long time. It's time for us to be real. We don't want Fantasyland. We want the real thing. Yeah.
You don't have to be taught to ride. You don't have to be taught to ride these rides.
Questions?
Okay, well, I'm just going to jump right in because this is a good forum to talk about this. You know, I think most of us who are in any type of workspace right now, how difficult and uncomfortable it is to talk about what's going on. And a lot of places are silenced, especially where we are now. My husband is a Marine. He's been a Marine for over 20 years now. And we are just now starting to see the military environment starting to condemn heavily racism by one major issue is banning the Confederate flags from all bases. The Marine Corps started that, I want to say a couple of years ago. The Marine Corps actually took the forefront and banned Confederate flags from their Marine Corps bases a while ago. I think it was just this week that the Department of Defense actually banned them on all military installations. So that's a start. But one thing I do know is that those things are still superficial. You may take the flag down, but many people are still holding on to what it means in their heart. I was in a conversation in one of my other forums that I was in, and one gentleman, he just could not understand what the big deal was. So what his comment was, when I think of, he was from Georgia, what he said is, well, when I see the flag, the Confederate flag, I'm thinking apple pie and iced tea and front porch conversations. And there was nothing that I could say or anybody else could say in this forum that could change his mind that the image that he sees is not the image that many marginalized people saw, and still see. So how do you continue a conversation? Because once I realized that there is no common ground to be found, I just kind of stepped back, because I don't think my energy is worth putting out if it's going to be wasted energy. So how do you all handle those conversations when you don't have someone that is willing to not empathize, because they can't, but at least try to understand?
Dr. Henderson.
That's a great question. Great example as well, Patrice. As a profession, so let me back up. What I would recommend to you and to anybody who has the same question is, I think you have to make a decision internally what you represent and what you choose to represent. And also what I talk about a lot is understanding your stimulus value, right? And so what I mean by that is everyone has a stimulus value. So I know as a Black man who is 6'3", I have a stimulus value, right? So just physically, I have a presence to me, right? And I understand that as someone who has a highest degree, right? Less than 1% of the American population has a PhD. Even less than that are people who are Black. So you say, how do you continue to have these questions? How do you continue to? What I heard you say is how do you continue to be an advocate, right? And so in the way that what I would recommend is how you exist, right? So how I exist and how I recommend others to exist is really, so what's important to you. It's the reason why I said what I said earlier, is that you cannot do anything with your skin, even if you try. You can't do nothing with the texture of your hair. You can't do nothing with your phenotypical presentation. So I would tell you to own that presence, right? And it doesn't mean that it has to be a verbal conversation, right? Your mere existence is an education. And what's problematic, I think, is that Black folks kind of carry that weight. Black folks kind of carry the weight of, let's say, well, I got to educate my white brothers and sisters, which compounds that racialized stress, which compounds that anxiety. It's not my role to educate everybody that has a Confederate flag, right? On the other hand, you're gonna know that I'm a proud Black person, right? And even if that person ever says it, in their psyche, they know what's going on. Like you said, philosophically, philosophically, folks may still be in the South, in the Confederate South, right? In present day, they know, like, okay, this sister, well, you kind of created a boundary. And I think that's part of mental health too, is being able to kind of create those boundaries around racism, right? Because if Black folks feel like they have to address racism every day, like, what you looking at? Oh yeah, you get something going on, you'll die, right?
So practically, Dr. Hen, Patrice, on that conversation, our young people in the classroom, at the store, there's an engagement. There's a whether it be subtle or whether it be very direct. What practically should she or they do to bring down their stress level, to, as you said, not feel like we got to get into every conversation? Because, and I'm asking not only for them, but I'm also asking for myself, because I get in it, and I'm because I'm in so many places, I have so many people throwing questions or gaslighting or whatever, and it raises my stress level. And so what can we do practically to be able to handle these conversations, or even prevent ourselves from jumping in?
And Dr. Henderson, I also have an opinion. So whenever you're ready for my opinion, let me know and I'll share it.
No doubt. So tied to Pastor Wells and tied to Sister Patrice. Now, y'all have to forgive me. This probably is just the teacher in me. I always kind of pose scenarios to kind of help folks arrive at their own question, even though I know Dr. Wells is asking for a specific example. So I'm gonna start with a story, then I'm gonna contextualize it for you. So I want us to think about a safari, right? I always ask this question: what animal gets eaten first in a safari? And folks be like, oh, the weakest one. No, it's the one that's by themselves, right? Which means that for us to prevent each other and for us to kind of have healing, it has to be a collective effort, right? So we have to be able to be vulnerable and to lean on folks, right? And you say, well, all right, Dr. H, what happens if you don't have anybody to lean on? And I would say, you know what, that's a valid question. And as my mentors always told me, before you find that trusted person in your life, you're going to kiss a few frogs before you find that prince or that queen or that princess, right? So the collective piece. Now, more specifically, just as an individual, what I would encourage is to think about, okay, be mindful of these different examples that happen and how they arise. So that awareness of self, right? So for example, I spent 9 years in the Midwest in Southern Illinois, which is more south than Mississippi, right? When I see Confederate flags, I just kind of, I become aware of what the situation is, and I keep it pushing. If those folks look like they're gonna be a danger, then I elevate it, right? Because I never forget where I'm at. And so part of that too is as Malcolm X always said, when you're south of the Canadian border, you're in the South, right? So I never lose sight of that. I never lose sight of where I am. And it helps me to cope just a little bit better than somebody who's not in the know or who will be surprised by racism when it rears its head.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I'm gonna let you jump in, Pete. What it sounds like you're saying, and what I would classify, or what I would respond to Patrice and to these parents and young people, is that you have to develop your emotional intelligence. You have to develop your emotional awareness. You have to know yourself, right? You have to know what your triggers are, right? And you have to know when to step away and when not to react, right? And so, and what I've heard you say, and you need to have someone else that you can share with, that you can share your frustration with, that you can share your hurt, your pain, your sadness. All of those emotions are valid. They're important for you. They're an expression of what's going on the inside. You don't want to internalize them. You want to express them in a healthy way. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And the reason why I say collectively, so more practically what I was getting at is that for the young folk who are on a call, so let's say some kids call you a nigger or some paraphernalia you found, in your locker room, right? The reason why I say the collective is, I want you to be able to go to somebody in your network that's going to advocate for you, right? Because what racism will do is they'll be like, hey, I'm gonna call you the N-word, and I want you to get upset and slap the taste out of somebody's mouth, all right? And they can be, oh, look at him, he's exactly what I thought he was, and then your career can experience a hindrance, right? You catch a case, potentially maybe go to jail. So that's the reason why I said you want to be in a collaborative. So you call myself, Pastor H, Dr. Wells, and then we can advocate for you in some different areas, right? Which is, I didn't say this when I introduced myself. That's one of the reasons why I got a PhD, right? So I can be in some spaces where some faces that don't look like me, and I can speak the language and I can advocate for folks on another level. Right? I don't need you slapping the taste out of nobody's mouth when I can go verbally, policy-wise, pen a letter that'll slap the taste out of somebody's mouth. Yeah. Right? So those are some things that I want. That's the reason why I highlight the collective, because it's very important, folks that you trust. And on the emotional intelligence piece, that's a part of becoming aware. Now, this is just a personal opinion, right? I find emotional intelligence to be equally or even more valuable than your IQ. Right? Because emotional intelligence, you're able to read a room, you're able to better anticipate people's intentions, right? And so that's how you're able to kind of be able to think about that. So You're
Yeah.
spot on, Pastor Wells.
Yeah. So let me say to our young people, Ayana, Jeremiah, Deshaun, what I just heard Dr. Henderson say is, he talked about getting his PhD and putting himself around tables and in spaces that that are not necessarily readily available. And so the challenge that I would give to you young people, and we've said this every week that we've been on this call, is that you have got to put yourself intentionally in places. You need to be the very best you can in your school environments, your school work. You need to work towards your degree. You need to apply to be on boards or to be on advisory councils, or put yourself in spaces where you can listen, where you can learn, and where you can speak truth to power. I was sitting with my granddaughter, Samara, who's on the call right now, and we were watching Princess and the Frog, right? Now, she's 15 years old, but she still loves Princess and the Frog. Sorry, Samara, I put you out there, baby girl. But we're watching, right. But we're watching Princess and the Frog, and the first thing I said to her when it comes to her, I said, I want you to identify in this Disney cartoon every instance of racial discrimination or stereotype. And as we went through the movie, she picked them off. That's awareness, right? And that's understanding that racial discrimination and stereotypes are interwoven in the life of American culture, right? Not just African American or white culture, but American culture. So I want to make sure that they understand the importance of their place, their importance of their place in special spaces. So I want to make sure. Pete, you had a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Pete. Before I go to you, I saw Michelle. Michelle, are you still here? Michelle, it looked like you had a question you wanted to ask, and you were before Pete.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Well,
I appreciate Patrice's question, because I struggle in that area myself of like saving energy, but also fighting the fight against racism and racial equity. And so thanks for bringing that up. My question or comment was going to be back to Pete's original statement that he was vulnerable and shared that he maybe didn't do the right thing in a conversation last week. And I've been listening to White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo about how white progressives are still part of the problem as much as we are trying to do the right thing and change the world around us. I guess I was just wondering, Dr. Henderson, if you had any advice, if maybe Pete already reconciled that situation, but what he or what we all could do, because we are going to continue to make mistakes. And Robin DiAngelo used an example of that in her own book, where she works at this every single day, but still was offensive in some of her comments and actions. And so I just didn't know if you had any advice for white people on the call that can, that we can try to make amends in places where we do offend people.
To my white folks, to my white brothers and sisters, and again, a lot of folks don't like my answers, but I really believe it and can speak to it. The first part is really being honest and being aware, right? So, and what I mean by being aware, to my white brothers and sisters who want to have the race conversation, you have to understand where you are in yourself. What is called white racial identity. So part of the thing with racism and white privilege is that white folks, either one, don't believe that they have a race, and two, they're not taught to talk about their race, right? And when they do, it's like watching, well, let me not say that. It's just like being very uncomfortable, right? And white folks get really uncomfortable, right? And by not addressing that discomfort, right, deflect in which you can appear to be more racist and more privileged than maybe what you really are. So the first thing is becoming more aware. Two is being able to sit in that discomfort. Now, for my white brothers and sisters who are more advanced, I would add a three. Three is really thinking about how you can advocate, right? Because Black folks been doing this since we came here, right? So it's now, we're not really going to achieve what we need to achieve. And I got to put it on my white brothers and sisters, right? Because it's going to take white folks to really join in and really be vulnerable in the fight to really kind of push other white folks to do the right thing.
Well, I appreciate that, Dr. Henderson. You know, one of the things Pete and I have been talking about is Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is an important piece of literature because what we have seen is that, you know, I have friends who said, I'm not racist, I'm not racist, I'm not racist. Well, first of all, we all have a hinge or a tinge of racism in us. Not just white to black or black to white, but we all have a part of it. It's a part of the human reality, okay? But it's not just enough to be non-racist. There has to be active involvement in the conversation to help those who are white progressives, who are a part of the conversation, to also be anti-racist, but to also know that has to be done very intelligently. It has to be done very, I almost hate to use the word calmly, but calmly. I'm on the trustee board for California Baptist University, and Dr. Ellis, who is the president of the university, sent out this letter from a parent. The letter was a long, scathing letter about how her son was racially profiled on campus and was called a nigger from a group of white students to his dorm room. And this parent she's unleashing in this letter, and she's basically asking the trustee board and President Ellis to do something about this. And when I read that letter, I almost felt like, oh my gosh, it was too much. It was like she was just unloading. And I was talking to my daughter about that. She says, but Dad, you have to understand how much pain and pressure that was built up in her having to write that letter. When we joked about, she was probably more like Medea. You guys know Tyler Perry's. She was just typing that letter out, trying to get that pain out of her onto the paper. And so it's really important to Michelle and to Pete and to others. It's really important that we do engage those who are struggling with this, and as Dr. Henderson says, you have influence and power that we don't have. You have influence and power that we don't have. That will be discounted because it's coming from us as a Black person. Pete, go with your question.
I just had a response to Patrice's question. You're in a setting and and somebody indicates that they don't necessarily understand the significance of a Confederate flag. We'll use the example, the significance of a Confederate flag in the same way that you understand it. And Patrice, correct me if I'm wrong, but you begin to shut down a little bit and say to yourself, I got nothing to say here. It's like, where do I go, right? Where do I go from here? How do I respond to that? Is that an accurate observation on my part, or maybe repeat what you said?
Oh, absolutely. I think I can sit with the best of them and conversate, right? I can sit with the best of them and have conversation and converse about these subjects. The issue is when someone is not open or willing enough to hear what I'm saying.
Okay.
I understand what you see. I can understand that. However, when they are not willing to do the same, to say, oh, I understand what you see.
Okay.
Idea is, at that point, I have no more energy to waste on a conversation that I know is not going anywhere. Okay. And I have learned that when these conversations come and they all look my way, sometimes I determine that I'm not going to engage in the conversation. I do not have to engage in the conversation every time someone wants to talk about race. And I'm looking at what's the motive about asking the question, and then all eyes, right, get diverted to me. At that point, I'm not willing to open that dialogue because I know what the intentions are. You're trying to poke something in me and to gain a reaction. So I think it is very important to be deliberate about your conversation. I think it's important to be very deliberate on who you're having conversation with and know when to turn the conversation off in a way where you can, one, continue to hold your dignity. Because like Dr. Hen said, sometimes you get in those conversations, your palms get to sweating, your nose get to beating up with sweat, because now you know that this is starting to bring a rise out of you. And that is not all the time, but sometimes that is what they're trying to do. So you have to discern what's the purpose of this conversation, and is it futile to have this conversation at this time or in this venue.
And, Patrice, I don't assume that I'm going to be saying anything that you don't know. I want to preface with that. I also want to acknowledge that I appreciate you reiterating what you said and also adding to it, because it allows me to understand your situation better. My own opinion is, oh, and I also want to mention Dr. Henderson, correct?
Yes.
Dr. Henderson's comment regarding the importance of boundaries. And I heard that to mean emotional boundaries. And I'm big on emotional boundaries. And so developing those emotional boundaries, I think, is really important. You may have heard, are you familiar with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Most people have seen them. And I'm not a big fan of huge lists. And I'm not a big fan of 75-page book that's gonna solve all everybody's problems. However, in that book, there's a concept of circle of influence and circle of concern. And this concept has helped me a great deal throughout my lifetime. Circle of influence, circle of concern. And that is that all of us have this circle of influence. And I was poking around back there. You saw me, I was looking for my visuals. All of us have this circle of influence and circle of concern. So you can see that the circle of influence is smaller than our circle of concern. Our circle of influence is where we have the most influence. And so we have this group of people and we have these environments where we have the most influence. Well, we also have these larger concerns that are outside of our circle of influence, where we just don't have as much influence, where we don't know the people that are going to maybe help us move in that direction. We haven't developed the network to make that happen. Covey influenced me and encouraged me to stay within that, to do as much as I can to stay within that circle of influence. Be concerned about things, but when I'm operating, when I'm working towards goals and objectives, stick within that circle of influence in order to have the maximum amount of impact. And the interesting thing that happens when I do that, and when people do that, is that their circle of influence grows. And look what happens is that things that were in my circle of concern prior now fall within my circle of influence, because my circle of influence has expanded. And so where in the past, maybe I wouldn't have been able to have that conversation with that individual, but because I developed my network and my knowledge, skills, and abilities in my circle of influence, and my circle has grown, now I might be able to have a greater impact on some of these things that I was concerned about before. So no, my opinion is you don't have to engage. Absolutely, you don't have to engage. I don't have to engage. We pick our. I think it's really important we pick our battles.
That's good. That's good, Pete. Thank you.
Can I one more thing? I know we kind of running short on time. Real fast, Patrice. I wanted to share this because I had a few things brewing about what I was going to share before we conclude here. is it's important to understand, not wanting to be vulnerable, right? Because sometimes when we share, white folks, people who are racist, they weaponize what we share, right, and then use it against us, right? And so sometimes when we're in that spot where we may be the only face in a place, that's just an added level of stress, when we're in those spaces to share, right? So you have to own that sometimes it's about safety, and it's not safe to share, which is why you might want to keep it moving, right? And so I think it's, in attending to all those things as it relates to mental health and race, right? So I just want to encourage you, and not saying anything other than just continue to honor those feelings when you're in those meetings.
That's really good. That's really good. We got a few more minutes. I want to allow for other questions. This is an important conversation. I'm asking Dr. Henderson, as he gets settled in his new assignment, I want to circle back to this question because, as you see my shirt, Black Men, Mental Health Matters. In the Black community, we have not effectively and honestly addressed issues around mental health. We never identified sadness or chronic sadness as depression. We didn't go, as Dr. Henderson talked about, we prevented or didn't go to the doctor as much as we could and stayed away. And so this subject matter is important to me. I deal with situational depression from time to time as a pastor. I think many pastors do. We lost several pastors to suicide late last year. This is a real issue, both in the church, outside the church, in the Black community. Anxiety, fear. We talked to our young people a couple of weeks ago, Ayana, Samara. They wept over the pressure of being in the Black community, and then being Black in the suburban community, right? That's a whole nother ball game, right? But this discussion of Black mental health and race is one that I really want us to push into. And Dr. Henderson, as you move into your career as an educator to young minds, I want to challenge you as a mentor that this is a subject matter that I think needs more attention. And I would really like to encourage you to really push in on this subject matter, because I think we need it. We need it in the church because we like to throw faith and prayer and anointing and laying on of hands on
Hallelujah.
Right, and hallelujah. And all those things are good, but all those things are not enough. The Word of God tells us that with a multitude of what? Counsel, which says that there is value in people that God has gifted with the ability to talk and speak to issues of the mind. And so I believe in the power of prayer, but I also believe in the power of conversation. Let's talk about this thing. Let's talk to God, right? But let's also talk to one another. And so that is something that I want us to circle back around to. For a few more minutes, are there any other questions? We are so glad that you are with us, Dr. Henderson, and we want to continue this for a few more minutes. Are there any other questions that someone would like to ask about this? I would really love to hear from our young people. Ayana, Deshaun.
I do have a question. It's sort of a two-part question, and I'm actually interested in hearing from the young people that are on the call as well. So my question is how, for Dr. Henderson, how can we connect an all-white group to the importance of being an anti-racist? And then sort of my second part to that would be to the young people on the call, what do you want your white peers to engage with first, or how could we be most impactful as leaders? Just to give you a little bit, I'm a coach, but I think in my heart, I'm an educator. So, and that's my approach to coaching. So that's my question. How I have an all white group, how can we connect them to the importance of being anti-racist, and then to the young Black folks, that are on the call, what do you want your white peers to engage with first?
Okay, Dr. Henderson, if you'll take that first part of the question. Ayana, Samara, Victoria, Deshawn, I need to hear your voice. I want you to respond to what Randy has asked in regards to what do you want your white peers to know? How do you want them to respond to this issue of racism? Dr. Henderson, and then one of our young people.
So, Randy, just to be clear, how would I recommend white folks connecting to Black folks?
So as a leader of an all-white group, how can I connect my group to the importance of being anti-racist?
I think it has to be experientially, right? I believe that folks are, and I always operate on the assumption that folks have some of the intellectual fortitude to know right from wrong, right? There's a demographic of folk that don't know right from wrong. And I do believe that experientially, that's really where it counts the most, right? Because we can read all the books about being anti-racist, but until we experience these things experientially, right, and understand the pain that comes from being a racist, or maybe the pain of having some white privilege, we're kind of removed from, those experiences. I share a quick story. I was working with a group of dental hygienists, right? All white women, one Latina, right? And so it wasn't until the end of this workshop where things got real, right? Real. And so throughout the whole workshop, like, yes, we're anti-racist. We believe in equality and, affirmative action for everybody and so forth and so on, right? It wasn't until this Latina had shared that when she went into the restaurant, right, she was discriminated against due to her accent, right? She was asked to sit in the back, and she didn't want to emote, right? But she emoted during the workshop. And it was at that point that her peers began to understand what her experiences were as a Latina, right? So that's the reason why I talked about being able to connect with folks interpersonally, right? We would like to connect across race, right? But beginning to connect to kind of understand some of those narratives, right? Because for generations, narratives have been dismissed, right? For whatever reason, right? We're just gonna leave it on the table. For whatever reason, I think we may know what some of those reasons are. And so when we're able to begin to understand some of those experiences, we're better able to connect and maybe understand, like, hey, you know what? When I was making some of those jokes, if there were a Black person on my team, they would have felt like this, right? This would have been their experience. So I might not crack some of those jokes, right? So forth and so on.
That's good. That's good. Randy, did that help? You need more?
Yes, the only way it could be better is if you give me examples of exact activities I can do, but I won't ask you to do that.
Well, I would say one of the things that I can add to that, get them reading. One of our biggest challenges is the lack of education around where we are today. How did we get here? I've recommended it. Both Pete and I are reading Stamp from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. Will help them understand how we got here. Obviously, White Fragility by Dr. Robin
D'Angelo.
What is it?
D'Angelo.
D'Angelo, thank you. Great book. James Baldwin, anything on James Baldwin? Dr. Daniel gave us a book last week, A People's History of America by Dr. Zinn. So get them reading. And even if it's just a chapter, right? Hey, we're gonna read this chapter before next practice. And let's have a conversation about this before we start our workout, right? And I think having that dialogue brings them into the conversation and automatically heightens their awareness, okay? Samara, Ayana, Deshawn, Victoria.
Real quick, one thing also, Dr. Janet Helms, who was one of the first researchers in white racial identity. So gotta give credit to her. And also a book that I recommend that is very simple. It's called Racism, Learned at an Early Age through Racial Scripting. So it helps understand how those messages may have been communicated. For example, let's just say one of your players, Randy, brings a brother home, right? When I say brother, I mean chocolate brother, right? So they bring a chocolate brother home, and her dad or mother says, "How come you don't like men that look like your father?" Right? So at an early age, that's communicating a message that white is right. If you're black, get back, right? So help understand, in those subtle messages. So getting them together. So then that's an experience, right? So your player may have been feeling that black, or chocolate brother, but given some of those things, some of that messaging, they don't connect and don't communicate their experiences.
Yeah, and I can say, we have parents. Many of you are parents. Some of you have older adult children. But I would just challenge you to be intentional about the conversation. I think we are at a period in our culture where we have to talk about these things. Dr. Henderson, who was the author of that book? And it seemed
Dr. Robert L. Williams. And just to give you some context on Robert Williams and what I didn't say in my introduction is one of the people who, if anybody has the most impact on me becoming a PhD, his name is Dr. Joseph L. White. And Dr. White is one of the founding members of the Association of Black Psychologists. The only reason why I brought that up is because Dr. Robert Williams, the author of the book, was right there. There were a group of 12 individuals, both male and female, who formed the Association of Black Psychology, right? And as an early grad student, and still to this day, kind of shaped who I am as a professional and how I like to exist in the marketplace, if you will. So Dr. White, who has written some other books, and Dr. Robert Williams, another for my white brothers and sisters, also to kind of help understand the racism in science. This book here is titled "Even the Rat Was White." It talks about how psychology was so white that the testing rats were white. And Pastor Wells, this brother taught at San Diego State, your alma mater, and it's Dr. Robert Guthrie. So Dr. Robert Guthrie was one of those, was the author. So those are just some introductory books. If you want to rip the Band-Aid off and kind of jump right into it, they'll help you understand some things. Yeah.
Really helpful, really helpful.
Yeah,
so
but
questions from our young people, or statements from our young people. Deshaun wrote in the chat in response to Randy's question regarding what, as an African-American youth, what they would like their white friends to know or do. And Deshaun said that he would like them to know what it feels like to have a target on your back, that it could kill you, or just to not think that we are animals. And Deshaun, you use a very important adjective there. And this is really at the heart of why we're having this conversation. What it feels like. And I want to stay there because, oh man, what it feels like stays with you in so many ways. It stays with you when you said it, Dr. Henderson, when a man enters his home with his wife and his children, right? He wants to be loving and understanding and calm. But if he has had to deal with racism all day long, he is coming into an environment with a loving family, incapable of fully engaging them at the level he needs to. And many of us grew up in homes where dad was either absent altogether, or he was a drunk, or he was an abuser, or he was absent in the home. But when you think about the history of that, what did he have to deal with in the auto plant or wherever he worked, right? What did he have to deal with? And then he has to bring that home to his family and to his children. And as Black men, these are things that we have to deal with every single day. Ayanna, I believe Ayanna or Jeremiah or collectively have said, I'm not really sure, to be honest, what they want or what they expect. The only thing I can really think of relating to them responding to the issue of racism is like reading the room and being aware of what they're saying and being willing to learn and not immediately get defensive or angry. I'm not sure if this is really on topic. I think it is on topic. Dr. Henderson, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, first I want to say, Deshaun, thank you for such a powerful contribution. And to Ayana and, hold on here, because I'm big on names. Are they still here, Pastor
They're still
Will?
here.
Yeah.
Ayana and Jeremiah, her brother, and Samar.
And to Ayana and Jeremiah, when I hear your comments, I'm slightly saddened, right? And the reason why is because our Black youth are often taught that if they make any peep about racism, then they are ostracized and shamed for how they feel, right? And I'm not trying to put any feelings in or words in Ayana or Jeremiah's mouth. It's just that when I talk to Black youth, this is not uncommon that you hear these things like, well, I don't really know. And the reason why that is most times is that, when I do speak about racism, when I do share my story, my narrative, it is not lifted up. And that's what's so painful, so frustrating, and so angry to me, right? And as a young person, imagine feeling like you have a target on your back as a young person, right? That the gravity of a young person to say that, right, it's alarming, right? There should be an alarm going off, right? Because we overstand the intellectual and emotional intelligence of Black youth, right? They're very much aware, very much intact, and very much understand the trauma that's going on. And that's the word I like to use, right? Because this is trauma, right? That the color of your skin is seen as something that's such a bad thing that it's traumatic. It causes pain emotionally and physically. So I want to thank y'all for sharing. And I also want to highlight again the importance, right, of being able to own those feelings, right? You shouldn't have to walk around and not own those feelings, right? It's tough, right? And I want to stand with you and say, I understand. I felt what you felt before.
Yeah.
Even as an older person getting a PhD,
Yeah.
even as a younger person who was in high school.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm not giving any parenting instructions to anyone on this call. And I learned how to be a parent trial and error. Attached to what you just said, Dr. Henderson, I think it's the importance of allowing our children in our home, and even when we have dialogue and conversation with them, is to validate and allow their thinking, their frame of reference, their point of view, whether we agree with it or not. I've got a 15-year-old granddaughter and a 30, however old John Treese is, daughter, and I have to listen. I have to allow her to share her point of view, and I think that that's important, and it's important on both sides. Ayana, Jeremiah, Samara, Deshaun, Victoria. It's important to listen when you're in the company of mixed race. Listen to what's said, and then ask questions. Let's not assume that a person's statement that may be ignorant in content, let's not assume immediately that harm was intended. And so being open to asking this question, what did you mean by that? And not with attitude and not with anger and not with whatever, but just really, I really want to know what did you mean by that? And then being able to converse intellectually, intelligently, converse calmly, right? And we know this. Whenever we raise our voice, or it sounds like we have a temper, or we start flailing our arms, now we're doing the Black thing, and we can't be heard. It's always exaggerated. But for our young people, I want you to know how important it is. The people that you have on this call, the people that you are with, these are all educators. These are all people who are intelligent. They all have degrees. you are looking at men and women who have gone through this, who have gone through what you are going through as young high school students. And so what we are hopefully trying to portray to you is that there is a way that you can have your voice heard in an intellectual and intelligent and calm way with information, right? Loaded with information and education, and that's what we want, and that's what we also expect from you. All right, let me get to the last two questions so that I can. My mouse is not working. There it is. So I can get you guys off this call. Samara is saying, I'm sorry, Samara. And thank you, Ayana and Jeremiah, and thank you, Deshaun, for including. Samara says, if a white person was in a Black neighborhood during this time, they would experience how it feels to be hated, and then they would feel unsafe and would ask to leave. We have to go through that every day. We seriously feel that every day, and we seriously feel that every day, and they get to feel that for an hour. It would just about break them. I really want my white friends to educate themselves from the beginning back to 1619, not the Jim Crow era, because that was centuries later. I want them to learn about the pain we went through for 401 years and counting. So to your question, Randy, Samara, which is my beautiful, intelligent granddaughter, and they are all beautiful and intelligent. I just have a bias toward her, rightfully so. She's saying exactly what her grandfather said, is let's educate, let's be educated, and let's be advocates of education. And that doesn't necessarily just mean reading a book. It could be exactly what I did on yesterday with Samara. Hey, tell me what you see. Because obviously we've watched Princess and the Frog, 100 times, right? She can quote the script. But what do you see in this film? And in any movie you watch? And then, like I'll sit with her and something will happen. I'll say, did you see that? Did you see that? And she's like, what? So I'll tell you about it later. And then we'll talk about it. I think that's a big part of educating as well.
Wait a minute. Wait, no, we just had it. That's it.
Hey, John, can I respond? Is Samara, are you still there?
Samara's here, yes.
Yeah.
I heard you. I just want to let you know that I heard you loud and clear, okay?
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I wanted to follow up with Patrice too. And John, when you said clarification, well, what did you mean by that, right? So you want to be engaged in dialogue. I want to be engaged in dialogue. Well, what did you mean by that? The other evening, the woman that I interrupted shut down and said nothing. And Patrice, I didn't request or demand clarification regarding what was going on. But although we haven't processed that event, I'm processing it. I'll guarantee you she's processing it. So what I want to make sure that we don't do is we don't assume that even though we decide, well, this isn't my battle, I'm gonna just let them sit on the idea of the Confederate flag. We can't assume that they're not sitting on the idea of the Confederate flag and not actually thinking about it. Sometimes I overestimate somebody else's intentions or what they're thinking. So anyhow, sometimes just saying nothing says it all. Because she said it all the other night when she just said, no, maybe we'll deal with this later, maybe we won't, it'll be up to me. But for me to force that on her and to say, okay, no, we got to talk about this, right? Well, yeah, anyhow. But I hear you, Samara, I hear you.
I just want to say thanks to the young people that shared. I appreciate your input, and The best thing I can say is that this is super hard work, and you guys should never, I think young people especially, you guys shouldn't feel that it's your work to do. I think a lot of the work that needs to be done is on white folks. And so, you know, don't get discouraged. It's difficult work, and, you know, yeah. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Randy. And so you're a coach. Do you have any white athletes on your team?
I actually am 100% white right now.
White.
This is it. I think this is it.
No, I think it's not. Pastor's not in two places at one time preaching.
Go ahead.
We're not there yet. You know, without giving excuses, I did inherit a team. You know, I've been at my current institution for about 1.5 years. So, you know, the few athletes that I have recruited, it just hasn't worked out to recruit more Black athletes.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I am. Why do you think your institution is not there yet?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I think they're, you know, volleyball tends to be a majority white sport. There are a lot of Black athletes now going into volleyball and choosing that. My program isn't funded super well, to be quite honest. So that's part of it. You know, there's a financial disparity there where, I mean, that goes to the root of all of the issue, right? The, you know, generational wealth and that sort of thing. So I have kids that can afford to help pay for their school, you know, and that's just a broad stroke kind of thought.
I respect that. I appreciate that. I want to challenge you. I want to encourage you. I want to support you to be an advocate to change that.
Absolutely.
I mean, and I know you know this. You're an intelligent young woman. You know that there's a cost, right? There's a cost to that, and there's always a cost to change, right? People gave their lives for change, and nothing changes without some degree of cost. And so I want to challenge you, even from the economic aspect of how your program is funded, to speak truth to power. I want to challenge you to who's ever scouting for your program. My granddaughter's a volleyball track athlete. I mean, they are out there.
Send me an email with her video.
Yeah. But I want to challenge you to really work hard at integrating, because that's also going to help the conversation.
Absolutely.
Right? Those young women, if they don't have quote unquote Black friends, if they're not in a place or a space where they can engage and interact with Black people, the only Black people they're going to know are those they see in the videos, those they see on TV, those they see in the movies. And if I can be a little bit blunt, that's not the real world Black. Okay, so we have to educate. I hope that that added a little pressure to you.
Yeah.
Hey,
I'll take it.
John,
I thrive with pressure, so I'll take it.
I know.
real quick, hey, Deshaun, are you still on?
Deshaun, yes, I see him.
Can you hear me, Deshaun?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to quote you, okay? To know what it feels like to have a target on your back that it could kill you, or just to not think that we are animals. Deshaun, I want to make sure you understood that I heard you as well. All right. And like others here in this chat room and on this Zoom call who have shared that causes sadness for them. Deshaun, that's a mixed range of emotions for me, including sadness, some anger, shame, and I wanted, Deshaun, you to know that I heard you as well, all right?
Dr. Wells, if I may.
Yes, ma'am.
I really want to encourage our young people, definitely in this time, to not to try not to see white people in a group. You know, I really want to encourage them that when they see white kids in their classroom or at the store, that they don't on themselves project what they think that every white person is like. That's a whole lot of pressure for our young people who are African American, who are Black, to think that the whole world is against them, when that is absolutely not the case. It's just right now, it's just in the forefront of the hearts of some. I do not want our beautiful African American boys and girls growing up with the stigma that they are hated by everyone. That's too much. I mean, that is really, really too much. And as, you know, master degree level, now working on my clinical license, you should see how we felt as adults, seeing what we see on the television every day, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. When in actuality, that's a small portion that we need to be educated about, but we just don't want them to just feel like that wherever they go, they are hated, because I really believe that they are not. And Dr. Henderson, if you could, you know, definitely maybe chime in on that, because that's a whole lot of pressure, especially in my office when I'm one African American among many whites. And if I walked in there every day feeling like, oh my God, all of these folks hate me, how does that make me feel with my own psyche? And I'm an adult and I know how to self-regulate my feelings. What do we say to our young people who are learning emotional intelligence a little bit at a time?
That's very good, Patrice, and I really appreciate that perspective, because you're right. We really can load up and load them up, even in this conversation. And so I really do appreciate that that perspective that you bring to the conversation. Are there any other questions from our young people for Dr. Henderson?
Hey, John.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure, but I think Patrice may have asked for a comment from Dr. Henderson on that one. Am I accurate on that or no?
Did I miss that? Do you have a question?
If he had something to say to our young people, to encourage them, only if he has something to say to them, to encourage them in what, I mean, this is really, we want to hear them say this, but we don't want them to leave here feeling that way. We want to give them hopefully a piece of encouragement.
Yeah.
Young folk, I want y'all to know I'm here. The reason why I do what I do is for the young folk, right? And let me just tell you a little bit about Dr. H. And so I have a lot of nephews, and inherently, you know, I look at myself as a big kid. So for those who really know me, you know, I like to have fun. You know, I like to be silly, you know, because I believe, and the reason, I don't even think I ever told you this, Pastor Wells, and the reason why I love kids so much is because they remind me of, and not to say that your kids is in juvenile, I know you're young adults, and the reason why I like kids so much is because they remind you to be honest, right? And a lot of the times when you're going through and when we're living life, you know, we're taught in not so subtle ways and subtle ways not to be honest, right? Because I believe that the truth always will free you, right? So the reason why I got in this game is to help pave the way for folks who are coming after me, right? I will do for folks of my age and my elders, but I really got in the game to really look after the young folks. And I'll tell you young folks like this. I was in Ferguson protesting for Mike Brown. And I had, so this was a silent protest for the NAACP. And after that silent protest, I had, we went to the place where actually Mike Brown was murdered at, right? And no one knew, at the time I was a doctoral student, right? know the kids. They didn't know who I was. They just knew I was a guy who had on an Alpha shirt, right? And I had walked up to some young men, and I gave them a hug, man. And now I want to set the scene for you. It was about 104 degrees outside. It was very humid. It was just hot and nasty. And I gave these young brothers a hug, and I told them, I said, man, while I am out here protesting, I said, I can never live the life that you live. But what I can do is promise you that I'm going to fight, and I'm going to be present in spaces that don't have many folks like us present, right? So I say that to say this, young folk, I want y'all to remain encouraged and to know that I'm definitely going to fight for you, right? Without a shadow of a doubt. And I dropped my email to Deshaun, but I'll put it in a group for everybody. Feel free to shoot me an email, right? And we can connect. Right? I know young folks like to eat, right? So, go grab a bite to eat and we could talk. But it's imperative, because what hurts me the most is that, with these young folks, there may be the cure for cancer, there may be the cure for AIDS, but due to racism, you won't pursue it, right? I was just talking to a young lady who wanted to go to med school. She said that a professor told her, like, aren't you supposed to know this? Kind of challenged her intellectual fortitude in a way that was attached to the color of her skin. And that just rubbed me the wrong way in so many ways. And so I just want to let y'all know that the reason why I do what I do is for y'all to be able to say, you know what, we feel good pressing on and pressing forward, right? And as a black man, and black man and black woman, young black man to young black man, and black man to young black woman, I understand some of that pain that you're experiencing. When folks say that, you know what, are you smart enough to be here? Or you're uncomfortable being in certain neighborhoods. And I end with this. It took me 9 years to get my PhD. Not because I wanted it to take that long, because I ran into a couple peaks and valleys. And I'll never forget this one meeting I had. This individual asked me if I had a traumatic brain injury, because I think so concretely, and it would be impossible for me to be a mental health provider and to get a PhD, right? And so I left that meeting in tears, called two mentors, and called my mom. In the conversation with my mom, I said, Mom, I've let you down. I've come all the way to Illinois, and I'm gonna not finish and get my PhD. And so, if not for people encouraging me, I was a lot older than you, obviously, but if not for people encouraging me, I wouldn't be here now. And so I want to make sure that you leave this call feeling encouraged and knowing that you have somebody who's going to stand by your side to fight and to keep you encouraged by any means necessary. And so that's what I'll leave you with. And I'll drop my email in this chat for folks to reach out if you need anything.
And I appreciate that. And I want our young people to know that that is true of all of us on this call. Pastor Boston, Coach, football coach, Coach Randy, counselor, therapist, Patrice Wheeler, retired law enforcement consultant, Pete Cohen, the grandmothers, grandfathers. We want you to win. We want you to succeed. We want you to be excellent. We believe in you. We have great hope for you. We love you. And we will do our part to make this world a better place as we hand off the baton to you to make the changes for the next generation. So that's what Aspire to Inspire is about. We're doing these calls every week. And if it's 6, 10, 20, or 2 people that are with us on this call, we'll have a conversation around these issues. I want to invite you to share this invitation, this weekly opportunity with your friends and family. I've got next week, I believe, I have a young man that was a gang member in Los Angeles, who I met several years ago. Went to jail, spent time incarcerated. He is now recently Teacher of the Year in the Los Angeles Unified School District. He has 4 sons, he's married, and just a phenomenal young man. And I want him to come on and have a conversation. And if you all have people you think that we should know about, that would like to be a part of this conversation, please let me know who they are. Please get them in contact with me. I would love to see how they might fit into encouraging our young people. You have young people that need to be in this conversation, friends. Please share it with them. The meeting ID is the same. It stays the same. That's also my cell number. I don't mind sharing that. Every week we'll be here. Same bat time, same bat chat. Are there any other questions before we go? That question? All right. Thank you all for being here. Patrice, you can go to bed now. I know that it's getting late there. Hey, thank you, Pastor Boston. Good to see you, man.
Wait, Pastor.
Yes. Who's
That's
that?
me,
Oh,
AJ.
hey, AJ. What's up, son?
Hi, Pastor.
How are you?
I'm good.
Good. It's good to hear your voice. Joanne, thank you for joining us today. You have a question?
Yeah, I do.
What's your question, AJ?
My question is, I just got here about a few minutes ago, and
I'm not hearing you.
because I forgot what I was gonna say.
Man, you got old age disease. That's our problem.
Yeah, you know what, man? That happens to me all the time.
It happens all the time, AJ. That's all right, man. You write your question down. You save it for next time, okay?
Okay, Pastor.
I love you, man.
Love you too.
That's one of my kids, man. I love him. All right. Hey, thank you, family. Thank you, Dr. Henderson. We are Aspire to Inspire is putting up our Cash App. If you want to support our ministry, support our efforts, support our community involvement, you can do that. That'll be up. I'll be posting this on YouTube and on Facebook Live. We appreciate you. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next week, 10 o'clock.
Bye, Pastor.
Bye.
See you later.